The air was crisp, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones if you stood still for too long. The streets were alive with people rushing home from work, neon signs flickering against the darkening sky, but Emily Carter barely noticed any of it. Her fingers tightened around Jake's small hand as they walked, her heartbeat unsteady. She didn't have enough money. And she knew it. She had counted the bills at least 5 times before they left the apartment, each time praying the numbers would magically change. They never did. $6.45. Just enough for a kid's meal and a small soda. Not enough for a cake. Not enough for anything extra. Not enough for the kind of birthday her son deserved. She forced a smile as she looked down at Jake, his wide brown eyes filled with excitement. "Mom, it's my special day, right?" His dinosaur-patterned backpack bounced with every step, a hand-me-down Christmas gift from last year that he still carried like a treasure. "It sure is, champ," she said, willing herself to sound cheerful. But her stomach twisted. Taco Bell wasn't a birthday party. It wasn't balloons or presents or laughter-filled celebrations like the ones he saw in cartoons. It was a desperate attempt to turn a simple fast food meal into something meaningful, a last-ditch effort to make today feel like more than just another struggle. The bright lights of the restaurant came into view, glowing like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "Do you think they have cake here, Mom?" Jake asked, his voice hopeful. Emily's breath hitched. She had prepared for this. She had practiced the words in her head, rehearsed them like a script she wished she didn't have to say. "Remember what we talked about, sweetheart? We could only pick one thing, and you chose lunch." Jake nodded slowly, but the flicker of disappointment in his eyes felt like a knife to the chest. "That's okay," he said, his voice quieter now. "Lunch is special too." Emily swallowed hard, blinking away the sting behind her eyes. She squeezed his hand a little tighter as they stepped inside, the warmth of the restaurant wrapping around them like a false sense of security. The smell of seasoned beef and melted cheese filled the air, but all she could feel was the weight of the $6.45 in her pocket. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped up to the counter. She didn't know it yet, but in just a few minutes, everything would go horribly wrong. Emily forced a smile as she approached the counter, her heart hammering in her chest. The cashier, a teenage girl with earbuds half hidden beneath her hat, barely looked up. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice flat, routine. Emily exhaled, steadying herself. "Just the kids' taco combo, please. And a small soda." She glanced at Jake, who stood on his tiptoes, peering at the brightly lit menu. His fingers curled into the strap of his backpack. "And fries too, Mom." His voice was hopeful, innocent. Emily's throat tightened. "Fries don't come with the combo, sweetheart, but the taco will be really tasty. You're gonna love it." The cashier punched in the order, not paying attention to the way Emily's hands trembled when she reached for her wallet. The old leather creaked as she pulled it open, exposing the crumpled bills and scattered coins inside. She counted quickly, $6.45. Exactly what she had. She handed it over, her fingers brushing against the counter. The cashier took the money, barely sparing a glance before moving on to the next customer. Emily let out a breath, relief washing over her as she guided Jake to a nearby table. Jake bounced in his seat, swinging his legs under the table as he unwrapped his taco. The simple meal might as well have been a feast in his eyes, and Emily clung to that, watching him with a mixture of love and guilt. She had done her best. She always did. "Mom, aren't you gonna eat?" Jake asked through a mouthful of tortilla. Emily shook her head, lifting the paper cup filled with nothing but water. "Not hungry, sweetheart," she said, forcing her voice to stay light. Jake studied her for a second, then shrugged, too young to recognize the lie. She let herself breathe for a moment, watching him enjoy his meal, but the weight never left her chest. Around them, other diners laughed, chatted, took their full plates for granted. A well-dressed woman at a nearby table eyed Emily with thinly veiled judgment. An older couple exchanged glances, whispering, their faces soft with something that almost looked like sympathy. Emily turned her focus back to Jake, tuning it all out. "I'm gonna be a paleontologist, Mom," Jake announced proudly, wiping his fingers on a napkin. "And when I find a real dinosaur, I'll take you to see it. Maybe even let you name it." Emily chuckled. "Oh yeah? What if I name it something silly, like Tacosaurus?" Jake giggled. "That's actually a good name." For a second, just a second, things felt normal. Then the cashier from earlier approached the table, breaking the moment like shattered glass. "Ma'am," she said, voice laced with boredom. "Your payment didn't go through." Emily's stomach plummeted. She blinked. I already paid." The girl gave her a blank stare, then held up the receipt. "Nope. It says incomplete. Looks like you're $2 short." The words hit her like a slap. $2. It might as well have been 200. Her breath caught in her throat as she reached for her wallet, opening it even though she knew exactly what she'd find: nothing. Not even a single forgotten coin. Jake looked up at her, eyes wide, sensing something was wrong. Emily's face burned. Around her, the restaurant felt too quiet, like the walls were closing in. The older couple from earlier had stopped whispering. The well-dressed woman was watching again, lips pursed. The cashier shifted her weight, impatient. "Look, if you can't pay, we either need collateral, an ID, something valuable, or we have to call the authorities." Emily's blood ran cold. Jake tugged at her sleeve. "Mom." His voice was small, uncertain. She swallowed, forcing her lips to move. I can run home. Get the money. We live close." The cashier rolled her eyes. "That's what they all say." A sharp pang of humiliation shot through Emily's chest. She had never felt so small, so exposed. Jake's fingers curled tighter around the edge of his tray. "Are we in trouble?" Emily's vision blurred. And then, just as her world was about to collapse, a voice from the counter cut through the tension. "I got it." The words were quiet. Calm. But they changed everything. Emily's head snapped up, her heart hammering in her chest. The voice came from behind her, low and familiar, but it didn't fully register until she saw the figure moving toward the counter. A man, tall with a quiet presence, stepped up to the cashier. He didn't make a fuss. He didn't raise his voice or draw attention. But his calm, composed demeanor was unmistakable. He slid a crisp $50 bill across the counter, his eyes briefly meeting the cashier's before he spoke again, his voice soft, almost inaudible. "I'll pay for that woman and her son." The words hung in the air for a split second, too surreal for Emily to process. She blinked, trying to make sense of what was happening, but before she could, the man spoke once more, his voice even gentler. "Please, add something special for them, too." The cashier hesitated, her eyes flicking back and forth between the man and Emily, before nodding, still stunned but compliant. She glanced at the man one last time, clearly recognizing him now. "Of course," she muttered, the realization hitting her like a wave. Emily felt her knees weaken as she watched the man step away, disappearing out the door without a word. Her mind was spinning, still trying to catch up with the bizarre turn of events. Her gaze shifted to Jake, who was still oblivious to the gravity of the situation, his small hands busily unwrapping the taco, completely absorbed in his meal. The cashier walked toward Emily's table, her expression a mixture of confusion and admiration. "Ma'am," she said, almost sheepishly. "The bill has been taken care of, by him." She leaned in a bit closer, her voice lowering to a near whisper. "Keanu Reeves." Emily's breath hitched. Keanu Reeves. The Keanu Reeves. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Emily's mind whirled, disbelieving. She had seen him on the big screen, in movies, in magazines, but this? This felt impossible. Jake, not understanding the shock on his mother's face, looked up from his taco and pointed excitedly at the small, colorful cake the cashier had just placed on their table. A single candle flickered on top. "Look, Mom. A cake." She said, "It's a gift." Jake's voice was full of innocent wonder, his eyes wide with delight. Emily couldn't speak. She stared at the cake, then back at the cashier, who gave her a small, knowing smile. The cake was simple: whipped cream, a few colorful sprinkles, a single lit candle, but to Jake, it might as well have been a masterpiece. He leaned forward, hands clasped together, eyes sparkling with excitement. "Can we make a wish, Mom?" he asked, his voice thick with anticipation. Emily could only nod, her throat tight. She reached for the small birthday cake, her fingers trembling as she placed it in front of Jake. He closed his eyes, his tiny hands clasped in prayer. "I wish I could meet a real dinosaur," he whispered, just loud enough for Emily to hear. "And maybe we can visit a real fossil someday." Emily swallowed hard, fighting back tears. She tried to smile, her heart aching for the innocence of her son. She didn't know who this stranger was, or why he had done what he did, but she couldn't deny the warmth that now filled the space between them. Jake opened his eyes and blew out the candle, his face lit up with a pure, untainted joy. "That's the best birthday ever, Mom." Jake grinned, eyes sparkling. Emily wiped away a tear, but it wasn't the kind of tear born from sadness. It was a tear of disbelief, of hope, of something she hadn't felt in a long time. She looked around, her mind still processing the act of kindness, when she finally saw it: the soft smiles of the older couple across the room, the compassionate gaze of the waitress, who no longer looked cold or indifferent. It was as if the entire room had shifted. The weight of judgment had lifted. Emily's eyes flicked to the door once more, half expecting to see the man return. But he was gone. Who was he? Why had he done this? But before she could ask herself any more questions, Jake tugged at her sleeve, his voice breaking her thoughts. "Mom, do you think he's a superhero?" he asked, his gaze focused on the last bite of cake. Emily's chest tightened. She looked at her son, who had no idea what had just transpired, what this man had done for them. She gently wiped a tear that had escaped, her smile faint but genuine. "Sometimes, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice catching, "regular people do things that seem like superhero stuff. And today, I think he was ours." Jake grinned and took another bite of his cake, his eyes never leaving the plate. And Emily, for the first time in a long time, allowed herself to believe in something beautiful. Something that wasn't about struggle, something that wasn't about loss. A quiet act of kindness. The next morning, the sun crept through the blinds of their small apartment, casting a soft golden glow across the room. Emily sat at the kitchen table, still reeling from the events of the day before. The cake was gone now, the last crumbs wiped away, but the weight of what had happened lingered in the air. Her mind kept drifting back to that moment, the quiet kindness of a stranger, a celebrity no less, who had seen their struggle and done something extraordinary without seeking any recognition. It felt unreal. As Emily sipped her coffee, her thoughts kept returning to Jake's face, the way his eyes had lit up when he saw the cake. That small act of kindness had not just made Jake's birthday, it had shifted something in Emily. She'd been stuck in a rut for so long, drowning in bills, loneliness, and the constant pressure of trying to make ends meet. And then out of nowhere, there was this light, this unexpected kindness from someone who didn't owe them a thing. Her phone buzzed, breaking her reverie. She glanced at the screen, still groggy from the night's restless sleep. The name on the display made her heart stop: Steve Parker. She hadn't recognized the number at first, but then she remembered. Steve Parker was the manager of the supermarket, the man who had been at Taco Bell the day before, the one who had witnessed everything. She stared at the screen for a moment, her hand trembling. With a deep breath, she swiped to answer. Hello. Her voice cracked slightly. Is this Emily Carter? The voice on the other end was warm and inviting, filled with a kind of sincerity that put Emily instantly at ease. Yes, this is she, Emily replied, trying to keep the surprise from her voice. This is Steve Parker, from the supermarket, he said. I was there yesterday when, something extraordinary happened. I just wanted to reach out and let you know how impressed I was by how you handled everything. Emily blinked, confused for a moment. Impressed? What do you mean? Well, Steve continued, his voice steady, I saw what happened at Taco Bell. You were in a tough situation, and you kept it together for your son. It takes a lot to stay calm in moments like that, especially when you're struggling, and you did it with grace. A lump formed in Emily's throat, and she fought to keep her voice steady. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Steve said with a chuckle. But I wanted to tell you that I saw how you put your son first, even in the worst of circumstances. That says a lot about who you are. Emily felt a surge of emotion. Her heart felt both heavy and light at the same time. The world hadn't been kind to her in so long, and yet here was someone recognizing the strength she never even realized she had. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Steve paused for a moment before speaking again. Actually, I was calling because my store is hiring, and I think you'd be a great fit for a customer service position. It's got flexible hours, decent pay, and benefits. I thought this might be an opportunity for you and your son. Emily sat back in her chair, stunned. She'd heard the stories, seen the ads, but she never imagined something like this would happen to her. I don't even know what to say. She let out a breath. That sounds amazing. I know it's not a solution to everything, Steve said, but it could be a start. I'd love to meet with you and discuss it further. How does tomorrow at 10 a.m. sound? Tomorrow? Emily's mind raced. She felt overwhelmed but also incredibly hopeful. Yes. Yes, absolutely. I'll be there. Great. I'll send you the details, Steve said. I look forward to meeting you, Emily. As the call ended, Emily sat in stunned silence for a moment. Her heart raced, and her mind couldn't quite catch up with what had just happened. A job. A real opportunity. For the first time in a long time, it felt like the tide was finally turning in her favor. When Jake came running into the kitchen, his backpack still slung over one shoulder, his energy as high as always, Emily couldn't contain the smile that spread across her face. Mom, are you okay? You look so happy. Jake exclaimed, his big eyes bright and curious. Emily knelt down to his level, cupping his face gently in her hands. I am, baby. I really am. Is it because of the cake guy? Jake asked, his face lighting up with that innocent wonder. Emily laughed softly, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. Maybe, she said, brushing his messy hair back. But you know what, sweetheart? Something even better happened today. I think today's the start of something good for us. Jake's smile grew wider, and without a second thought, he threw his arms around her neck in a tight hug. I knew it. I knew everything would work out. Emily hugged him back, holding him close, her heart full. You were right, champ. You were right. As they pulled apart, Jake glanced up at her, his eyes wide with excitement. Do you think we'll see the cake guy again? Emily smiled and shook her head. I don't know, Jake. But even if we don't, he did something really special for us. And that's all that matters. Jake nodded, content, before darting off toward the living room to play with his dinosaurs. Emily watched him go, her heart swelling with hope. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she could finally see a light at the end of the tunnel. Things were changing. For both of them. And this time, it felt like they were going to be okay. Later that afternoon, as Emily sat down at her laptop to look up the job details, she felt the familiar sense of dread creep in, the overwhelming weight of bills and deadlines pressing in on her again. But now, instead of giving in to that sense of hopelessness, she found herself smiling, feeling a renewed sense of possibility. She wasn't alone in this anymore. There were people who cared. There were good people, like Steve, like Keanu, who had reminded her that kindness still existed in the world. And maybe, just maybe, it was finally her turn to catch a break. As she scrolled through the job listings, something in her heart told her this was the beginning of a new chapter, one that wouldn't be so hard. Not anymore. The next morning, Emily walked into the supermarket with a mix of nerves and excitement swirling in her stomach. The air was thick with the scent of fresh produce and the hum of shopping carts, but all she could focus on was the meeting ahead. She smoothed down her shirt, took a deep breath, and made her way toward the office in the back. It felt surreal. Just yesterday, she had been standing in a Taco Bell, barely scraping by, and now here she was, on the brink of something new. When she reached the office, Steve was waiting for her with a warm smile, his handshake firm but kind. They exchanged pleasantries before sitting down, and as Emily shared her story, the struggles, the single motherhood, the moments of doubt, Steve listened intently, nodding and offering reassurance. He didn't make her feel pitiful. Instead, he made her feel like someone with potential, someone worth investing in. By the end of the interview, Emily felt like she had known Steve for years, like she had just spoken to a friend who genuinely cared about her future. "I think you'll be a great addition to the team," he said with a confident smile. "We're offering you the position, and I really think it'll be a good fit." The words hit her like a wave, a rush of relief and joy flooding her chest. "Are you sure?" she asked, almost laughing, almost crying. "I mean, I can't believe it. After everything." Steve chuckled. "You deserve it, Emily. Don't second-guess yourself. Take it. We're excited to have you on board." She thanked him, practically floating out of the office, her heart soaring. As she walked back to her apartment, she could hardly believe it. A job. A real, steady job. The kind she could rely on to build a future for Jake. At home, when she told Jake, his face lit up like a Christmas tree. "You did it, Mom. I knew you could." Emily knelt down to his level, brushing the hair out of his eyes. "We did it, sweetheart. This is just the beginning for us. Things are going to be okay now." Later that afternoon, as Emily settled into her new job, the weight of the world felt lighter. She found herself smiling more easily, holding her head a little higher. It was amazing what a single act of kindness could do. A moment of generosity from a stranger had set off a chain of events that had changed her life forever. Keanu Reeves had no idea, of course. He had probably gone on with his day, like he did every day, living his quiet, private life. But for Emily, his small, kind gesture had been a turning point, a sign that even in a world that felt cold and unforgiving, there was still kindness to be found. And it was that kindness, that simple but profound act, that had sparked everything that followed. A few weeks later, as Emily and Jake sat on the couch, flipping through a book about dinosaurs, Jake suddenly looked up at her, his face full of wonder. "Mom, do you think the cake guy is like a superhero?" Emily smiled, wiping away a tear that had unexpectedly fallen. "Maybe he is, sweetie. Maybe he is." And in that moment, she realized that the real superheroes weren't always the ones in capes. Sometimes, they were just ordinary people, doing something small that changed someone's world. Like Keanu. Like Steve. Like so many others she had yet to meet. Emily had once believed that her story would always be one of struggle, but now, as she held her son close and looked out the window at the city skyline, she saw something different. She saw hope. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was no longer alone. She was part of something bigger now, part of a world where kindness mattered, where even the smallest gesture could change everything. And that was all she needed to keep moving forward.